Good afternoon, or good morning, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Rita Marsh, and I'm with the Center for Human Flourishing in Carbondale, Colorado. And I'm here today with my friend and colleague, Jean Owen, and to talk about a project that she has recently finished up, but hasn't launched yet, and that is the book, Shuring, One Soldier's Path to Peace. Jean, how are you today?
I'm great. Thanks, Rita.
Good, good. Well, this has been quite some time planning this and getting together, but here we are.
Yeah.
And I want to ask you about the co-author of your book, Donald Cody Owen. Who was Cody and how did you meet?
Well, Cody and I first met in Denver when I came home in 1995. I came home upon spirits calling me to look in on my father, who I suspected had Alzheimer's, and he did. And so I started sharing with my friends in Denver that I'd had for a long time that I was home caregiving my father, and Poppy would be there for however long it took. And one of my friends mentioned she knew a man who was doing a bicycle ride for Alzheimer's. He had been a caregiver over at a special facility near Grand Junction, and during that time had gotten, through prayer, had gotten the message that he was to do this bicycle ride for Alzheimer's and ride around Colorado. And she introduced us and we started talking, and we didn't stop talking for 14 years. So,
That's amazing. Yes. And you were married.
we were on the ride, the first year's ride. A month into the ride, we'd gotten a marriage certificate in Colorado Springs, and it was burning a hole, so to speak, in my pocket. And by the time we arrived at Springfield, a week or so later, this was a 1,500-mile bike ride that first year. It was a 4.5-month event on the road. And we stopped 72 times and set up, or 82 times and set up tables in front of City Market and Safeway. And it was a long day. It was a 92-mile ride, which was a typical ride for him. And I was ahead of him. I was the sag wagon. So I rode into Springfield, and someone directed me over to the hospital because they were going to be opening up an Alzheimer's wing. And so I met the director of the hospital and the woman responsible for fundraising to build this new wing. And she found out my then fiance was on his way there. And so this was before cell phones. So I just went outside of town. She invited us over to the Lions Club luncheon and asked if he might speak. And I said, of course, he'll want to speak. So I met Cody outside of town, and he followed me, and she took me in her car, and we went over to the Lions Club and had lunch. And during lunch, he shared what the journey we were on, and the fact that we were engaged, and I was complaining to him that we hadn't gotten married yet. And one of the guys there, the guy that was actually leading the meeting, stood up and said, well, it just so happens that I'm a minister of United Christ Church, and I'd be happy to marry you over later at the hospital if you want. And so long story short, we followed them over to the hospital, and some women put together a bouquet. Someone brought out a boom box, and someone gave me a hat. And of course I was in bicycle shorts, and so was he, because he's still on the ride. And we were married that day in front of where they were going to break ground for the Alzheimer's wing.
how amazing.
And they had
That's
two,
really special.
two newspapers come over and interview us, and then they gave us a free night at their only motel in town. And so we slept in luxury that night.
Cody was a Vietnam vet, is that right?
Yeah. Yes, he was. And when I met him, he just half a year earlier gotten out of the hospital, the VA hospital, with a blood clot in his right foot. Then they wanted to amputate his foot, and he said, "No way, I need this foot. I'm gonna walk again, and I'm gonna do this ride." And so he did. In fact, he had a lot of pain in that foot because he kept getting blood clots. And this was a blood disorder that ultimately would lead to his demise, because turned out he had suffered from Agent Orange, and it caused a lot of different problems in his system, including cancer at the end.
Hmm. Well, where did the idea for this book come from?
Well, Cody suffered greatly from PTSD, and it was something that was a daily occurrence. He would have flashbacks. He wouldn't sleep through the night. I don't think he ever slept through the night in 14 years that I knew him. And depending on what trauma, like one time we were in Telluride for 4th of July, and they had put us up at their local city park for the night. And so we camped out. And at sunrise, they blew up a cannon in the canyon, and he lifted off the ground about 2 inches, and he was in PTSD shock. He was in flashbacks for 2 days. He was out of it, so he couldn't ride those 2 days because he wasn't in the same mental space anymore. And usually when this would happen, it would trigger him drinking. This time it didn't. He was on the ride, so he knew he had to stay fit. But toward the end, he realized, and about the time he lost his leg, which was 6 years before he died, he had a right leg amputation, actually had 2. And he realized he could maybe use some of the meditation he'd previously done in his life to help alleviate the pain. And
Mm-hmm.
it did help. And it did help with his mental state as well. And none of the drugs were working. He'd seen psychotherapists. He'd gone to the treatment center in Wyoming for PTSD early on when he returned from Vietnam. But it seemed to be working for him to help allow him to come to some peace and some forgiveness of the experience he had of war. So he started putting his one-line prayers. They were simple. It followed his mantra, which was Shuring, and Shuring meant only God, only love, only forgiveness, only service. So he would write his one-line prayers following those 4 pillars of his mantra. And maybe at the end he had 460 or so 3x5 cards, and he would use these every day, and he would call his friends. And at this point he was in recovery from alcoholism, and he would call people in the program that were his support system, and he'd share the prayer with them, and they'd do their morning meditation around those prayers. And that's the beginning of, that was 2 years before he died. He really did that on a daily basis.
Thanks for that sharing. I'm going to screen share now and just so we can see Cody's book cover here, because my understanding was that he put all these notes together and pretty much had a manuscript organized before he passed away. Is that correct?
Yes, he and I collaborated those 2 years, and I knew he was actively using the prayers and they were working. So his intention was to share them with other people who were suffering from their experience of war and also PTSD. And so we started putting a book outline together, and I shared it with some people along the way that were knowledgeable on book writing, and put the structure of the book and pieces of the book, and I started collecting information from him. And I knew where his journals were. He was a real journal writer. And also his 3x5 cards. So when he died, I was pretty much ready to organize the materials in a form that I could submit to a publisher. And I chose Wayne Dyer's publisher, Balboa Press, because I was so impressed with his work. And I used some of the money from the insurance that I received after his death to buy a self-publishing rights. And they helped, the publisher helped me structure, asked me to start submitting work, and I did, and they guided me along.
So it was 2009 that Cody passed away, and you had the opportunity to go over the final outline with him before that came about. And
he
then
on Friday and he died on Sunday.
and then the book went to rest for a bit and was finally published in 2018.
Right.
But part of that was a journey that you took to Costa Rica and Panama. And down there you were working on the book and communicating with the publisher. How was that?
I wouldn't recommend it for someone in their sane mind. It was difficult because really the only way I communicated was by phone and email, and all my corrections and changes to the script and all that could take place easily that way. But then submitting final documents and receiving documents from them, I had to use the mailboxes, etc. Luckily, there was one in Boquete, and I was on a dial-in with them, and they would see me every day, and I would go down there and pick up the materials, and I'd make sure I knew what their schedule was the next day. And they closed a lot for celebration of ceremonies and activities, and Boquete is very active as a community and doing things. So it was challenging. It was really challenging.
But I'm just going to share again my screen so we can have people see the book cover here. Let me just try this again.
And that was Cody in his writing jacket. He was so proud of that jacket. And he had a writing shirt and writing jacket that he put patches on. One of the patches that he was so proud of was his first calf patch, which here you're viewing on the right-hand side of the screen, part of it. And then, because he served in the first cav in the Army in Vietnam. And then his sponsors were Bicycle Village and Schwinn. And he just, he was a prayerful person. And so this is taken about 3 weeks into the first year's ride. He did 6 years ride, 8,800 miles for a organization we started, which is called Ride for a Cause. And he was just a solo rider. And every morning he'd get up and he'd open the Bible to a verse, and we'd have prayer time, whether we were camped out or in a hotel room or riding in the back of the truck. And so this is him in prayer that morning at this restaurant we stopped.
This is the cover of the book.
Uh-huh.
Now, many people in the Roaring Fork Valley would know Cody from community service that he did. And one significant thing, I remember he was a crossing guard in Carbondale at the very, very busy intersection on Hendrick Drive and Highway 133.
Right. He did that for 2.5 years during rain or snow or sunshine with his service dog, Yogi. And he almost got hit about 5 times. And he turned in 3 people who were drunk driving. And so he was of more service than maybe people would have thought. A lot of people knew him from that work.
Uh-huh. And this is a wonderful picture of you and Cody when you were doing the ride.
Right.
And
that's actually the first date we had. A picture
oh my
that
goodness.
Morris took. And her step brother, we dedicated the first year's ride to him. Well, actually the 3rd year's ride to him because he had spina bifida. And he was very dear friend of Cody's. She was a very dear friend. And so she took the picture of us, and we had met for breakfast across from the VA in Denver.
It's a lovely picture. And is that the support vehicle in the background?
That was actually her Jeep. Yeah.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Okay. When you were away in Costa Rica, you pretty much had the book organized and ready to go to the publisher. And did it actually get shipped to the publisher or electronically transferred to the publisher in 2009?
The final draft and all the workings and everything that I had put together in those months, actually I was there 1 year and 3 months, but in that time, were sent from Panama in Boquete, and it was sent and it was approved. The final draft was approved on November 11th of 2018.
Oh, that's significant.
Yeah,
yes.
Veterans Day. Yeah.
Yes. Uh-huh.
And I was really pushing to get it out before the end of the year to get it published and maybe have it available to me when I got home.
And what was Cody's desire for the book? What was his?
He wanted to share his good grace, which was the blessing that he'd received from doing these meditations, these simple one-line meditations every day with others who were suffering. And he knew quite a few of those people. Every year we'd go to the veterans ceremony up in Aspen. He actually only started going the last 8 years of his life, because before then he was not going to get anywhere close to any other veterans. He didn't want to talk about Vietnam. He didn't want to interact with people who served like him. But at some point he decided it was important to acknowledge his own service and the service of other people. And so he started going to that, and I forgot the question.
His desire for the book, what did he want to see?
Well, he wanted to share it with other vets mostly.
Yes.
And every year we'd see more and more vets come out of the Vietnam vets come out of the woodwork and come to those ceremonies. So, and he'd always connect with them. Because he was in a wheelchair and he was good looking and he had his first cab patch on his jacket and everything, and he'd wear his Vietnam vet hat. He was a good person to photograph. And so many times he would get an article written with him on the front cover of the Aspen Times or Aspen Daily News. And because he was so photogenic and he'd always get up to the wherever they are having the microphone and he would say something.
Do you have a copy of the book with you there?
I do.
Yeah.
Let me just lift this.
Maybe, oh, good, yes. And maybe you could just open it up to a couple of meditations and just share with people.
Sure. Just randomly.
Yeah, just randomly.
I now think thoughts of love.
And that he would say over and over as a mantra, as meditation.
Mm-hmm.
I now think thoughts of love.
And this one says, the power of God can move mountains and easily guide my thinking and actions.
Just one-liners and
Yeah.
used as a mantra in meditation, I could definitely create a good brain state.
Mm-hmm. Only forgiveness in God, country, and family. So they were cleansing. They were things that he needed to say to himself to bring him out of a state of trauma, as well as he needed to share with other people. Like I said, toward the end, the last 2 years, he was calling his friends every day, people in recovery that he was connected to, and then were part of his support system. And they would go through these sayings together and meditate. In all ways, acknowledge God. My path will be directed.
Thank you. Thanks for that share.
You're welcome.
Now, 2018, that was 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
The book has been published. It's available on Amazon, and but it really hasn't been launched. There hasn't been a public party to
No, not really. To celebrate.
To congratulate Cody, because I know he's watching down on this, and to celebrate you and the work that you did to make this a reality. As a little thing.
Sending it off to his dear friends, sending a copy, sending it to all of my family and my now boyfriend's family, and to those people who are involved in the book.
Mm-hmm.
So those people have a copy.
Well, COVID got in the way, and so everybody went into lockdown. And now we have the opportunity to meet in public, and we have a book launch planned for later this month, after Veterans Day, after November 11th. It's actually a week after, Thursday evening, in Carbondale at 3rd Street Center. You're going to be here with the books and be talking to people in person about this amazing adventure.
Right.
And letting people know more about Shuring and Cody's mantra: only God, only love, only forgiveness, only service.
And I've already connected through the email that I sent out of noting that these events were going to take place, today's interview and the book signing on the 18th. So a couple vets have gotten in touch with me, and I'm going to see them up at the Veterans Day ceremony that's going to be in Aspen on the 11th at 10 o'clock up at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. And I'm taking books with me to give to these people.
That's wonderful. I want to put up on the screen here. Hopefully I can get to the next one here. That the book, let's go back here. The book launch is going to be Thursday, November 18th, 6:30 p.m. at 3rd Street Center.
Mhm.
and people want to let us know that they're coming, they can RSVP to info@davinakent.org,
Great.
or they can get in touch with you. And what's the easiest way for that to happen, Jean?
Probably by way of, I guess by way of email. My email is Jean, Jean, Bennett, Bennett, Owen, Owen, @gmail.com.
Thanks. Now, being a first-time book publisher, what advice could you give to people who are taking on the project of a self-published book?
Get organized and be patient with yourself because you're going to make mistakes. And the publishing process, at least the self-publishing process, I'm sure it's the same with published by directly by a publisher, is arduous process. It's time consuming. It requires a lot of attention to detail. You're going to be digging through material. In this case, I was digging through his material that I had collected from his apartment because we didn't live together at the end. He was in a wheelchair and my house isn't wheelchair accessible, and he lived in public housing and he wouldn't qualify if he lived with me, and so we had to get divorced in order for him to qualify for housing. So he lived over at Crystal Meadows in Carbondale, and I knew where his materials were so that I collected them from his apartment before I closed it down.
Well, I know Cody lived a very honored life, and in 2003 he got an award from the governor's office. Is that right?
That's right. He
And
qualified for, through unemployment, he qualified for a special program where he was, as a part of that program, he was required to follow a very rigid outline of a series of classes and coursework. And it was like getting a certificate in opening a business. And he had to put together a formal program for the business plan and write the marketing plan and all of these things that you would be required to open a business. And so I worked with him on that. And that was his business that he started, Passage to Freedom. And he had that for the last 6 years, he ran that business. And his primary work was with RAFTA, Roaring Fork Transit Authority, to get them up to speed on their accessibility and following the governmental requirements for them as a transit authority. And we did all the training of their drivers, bus drivers of the lifts. And he did daily and weekly bus checks, which meant he'd go out in the field and he'd, in his wheelchair, and he'd stop at a bus stop and he'd have a driver use the lift, knowing hopefully how to operate it. If they didn't, he could train them right on the spot. And this, took place for 6 years. And I think due to that work, RAFTA easily got the FTA grant from the federal government to start their BRT, because otherwise they wouldn't have passed the federal requirements.
Passage to Freedom,
Passage to Freedom.
helping people with disabilities get access.
We did a lot of things. Snowmass Village, before they set up their transit center, they asked for our consultation of the ramp and the things, various aspects of that facility. And Jim Finch was key in that. He was Cody's best friend and taught Cody how to use a wheelchair, and remained with him as a best friend till the end. And we had other people out in the field that were also assisting us in doing these ride checks.
So in 2008, Cody received Friend of Transit Award from REFTA for
Right.
the
And
work.
we went to Grand Junction. They have a big event every year of their awards, and driver of the year, and in this case, Cody's company and Cody were awarded the Friend of Transit Award, which is kind of a big deal. And Jim and he and I all went to receive the award. It was a beautiful handmade blown glass platter. It was so wonderful. And I gave that to Jim after Cody passed away.
Well, thanks. Is there anything else you'd like to tell people today about Cody, about the book, before we close out?
Just that it was his vision to see this out in the world and help other vets. And I hope that the book launch, along with my contact to people and through other people that are involved in veteran support services, will share the word as well, because even though someone may not have served in more, but if they have PTSD, I think they could benefit from his work.
Oh, and the book is in hardback and also paperback, is that right?
Right.
And one of Cody's desire was that the size of the book would be just right for a person to put in their backpack or in their jacket pocket, so it could be easily accessible.
Because his one regret was he didn't have a Bible small enough to carry in the field, and he was out as a forward observer, so he was way out in front of the troops with his radio man, and he felt he was estranged from God during that time. I mean, he had a sadness about having lost touch with his own faith during that time, and it was a challenging time, of course. I mean, he went through many horrific experiences, plus he was captured at one point, so he was prisoner of war. He and his radio man escaped, luckily. And he lost 2 radio men out in the field, so they were always under sniper fire. So it was a challenging time, and he knew how important it is his idea was to have the family back home and the person who was serving, whether it be a man or a woman in the field, when they were separated from one another, going through the book together, so they would have some way to connect as well.
Be a touchstone.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I want to remind people about the book launch on Thursday, November 18th at 3rd Street Center in Carbondale. And we'll have this video up on our YouTube page and be telling people about it so that they can get a preview. And then do come and meet Jean on Thursday, November 18th, and learn firsthand about the journey with this book, Shuring, One Soldier's Path to Peace, co-authored by Donald Cody Owen and Jean Bennett Owen. So Jean, thank you very much for being with me today, for sharing this story, this journey, and hopefully the books are going to fly off your table out your door.
Thank you.
And,
thank you for the opportunity to share this.
And be of the help to people that Cody wanted them to be.
Yes.
So thanks. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
You too. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.